بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد أما بعد. Right, so inshallah this is going to be our second masterclass. The first week we focused on developing robust habits that will make sure that we don't detract, that we don't become less efficient or unproductive when it comes to our seeking knowledge, inshallah. So as we inshallah, we have set those habits in motion. We've all taken our first steps and are constantly giving weekly reviews, inshallah, and we continue to develop on that front. We will begin our studies formally with a masterclass in language learning because most of our studies are going to be focused on language learning. We are going to be spending a huge time on the mastery of the Arabic language, starting from right at the basics, right at the ground level, perhaps even basement level for some people, right? So we need to make sure that we are very, very clear on the language principles, language learning principles, very early on, inshallah. So we are using all the right principles and tools regularly and throughout this journey so that we can, inshallah, reap the maximum reward, bi-idhnillah ta'ala. So to begin, let's look at learning a language, right? The process of learning a language in a nutshell. We're going to start this with a little interactive exercise. Now, the first question would be, I know there's a few of you, mashallah, in the group. How many languages do you guys speak? How many languages do you guys speak? Mashallah. Name those languages as well, please. So that we, of course, you all speak English. That's one. But any other language that you do speak, mention that language, please. Okay. Mashallah. Okay. Right. That is fine. If you only speak one, that's fine, inshallah. Very soon you're going to be speaking two, inshallah. Right. So, mashallah, most of you have an understanding or an idea of what it feels like to speak more than one language, right? So, let me ask you this. How hard was it to learn the second language that is not your mother tongue? That's the first thing. How hard did you find learning it? Did you go through, a similar curriculum as to, the Medina books or the Arabi Baina Yadayk books? In all the languages that you speak, right, other languages, have you actually gone through a curriculum like that to allow you to speak the language that you speak, other than English? Yep. Very good. Very good. Very good, mashallah. You guys haven't, all these languages that you mentioned, mashallah, you haven't learned any grammar, you haven't gone through any formal program of studies. You've just picked up a language and you're natives in those languages, right? Subhanallah. You're natives in those languages. How is that? How is it that we as a culture have made language learning so difficult when, subhanallah, most of us speak 2 or 3 or 4 languages just growing up, listening to our parents, going to school, just random interaction with people? How is it that you haven't had to go through that agonizing experience of finishing a 2-year, 3-year curriculum, to learn your second languages, for example, right? And why is it that people have made it so difficult to learn a second language? it shouldn't be so difficult, right? This brings me to this exercise was just to show you that you don't need to learn grammar of a language to speak it or to interact in it or communicate in it. You don't need to go through an organized program. The tools I'm going to give you, inshallah, and of course, this lecture will also be published for the public. Anyone who's listening, who's not part of the course, the DAI program, if you take away everything that we mentioned in this masterclass, you don't need to enroll in any program. The knowledge and the tools are free for all to use, and if you're honest and earnest with your goals, inshallah, you can achieve fluency in any language. All right, so this brings me on to the second question, which is, how is it that people learn up to 5 to 10 languages, right? And Muslims can't learn one. It's such a sad reality, right? So many institutes teaching you Arabic and different programs. Why such a huge amount of time, energy, and mind has been spent on designing all of these curriculums, when learning a language can be so much more simpler? I mean, think about this, 5, 10 languages, right? I know people who speak like 10, 12 languages. I myself, right, have an idea of about 4 or 5 languages that I can read, right? And then another 4 or 5 which I can exchange pleasantries in and, understand, roughly, A1 level kind of thing, right? So 5 languages I can actually conduct research in, right? That includes English, of course, Urdu, Punjabi, Arabic, and Farsi, Persian. So, other than that, I can read Hebrew. I can I used to know how to write Hebrew as well. It's just been I'm a bit patchy on that, but I've read the Torah, the actual Chumash, in Hebrew to some of my Jewish students. That's how I learned Hebrew, basically. I used to teach maths to some Jewish family, to a Jewish family in Manchester, and I picked up the language, trying to give them da'wah. So that's 6 languages. Other than that, just pleasantries, A1 level stuff, basically. Right. So how is it that some people can, go up to 5, 10, 12, some people, even up to 20, and, some people even, people who live for this, they can speak up to 40, 50, 80 languages even, right? Why is it that Muslims can't learn one? Especially when most of the Muslims are not, for example, native Arabs. And they already speak, but when you're not a native Arab, it basically means that you grow up with multiple languages. It's a de facto state of being. If, for example, in India, back in colonial times, a stereotypical Indian gentleman would be someone who could easily have a mastery of 5 languages, 4 to 5 languages, easy. That was the stereotypical image of an educated Indian man, right? The same with the Malaysians and the Indonesians. They used to speak multiple tongues. They were educated in multiple tongues, right? And of course, the people who were colonized, so Algerians and Moroccans and elsewhere in the Muslim world, how is it they picked up all these languages? And yet for non-Arab speakers, it's so hard to just learn Arabic, right? So it really comes down to a few things, of course. One is a willingness to learn. I run this daily quiz on Twitter in a community, and some people, they comment on the daily quizzes, like some of you reply back in emails, but some people reply back in the Twitter threads, and some they can't. They mention that the reason why they are not, they can speak like 4 or 5 languages. That's one of the students mentioned, like they can speak 4 or 5 languages. And when I asked them why can't you master Arabic if you're so competent in the other languages, they said, well, I'm just a bit lazy. So one thing is, it comes down to being serious enough to learning Arabic, because Arabic is something which, especially for learning the classical Arabic, which no one speaks, so you don't have any vocational benefit or perks in that regard. So you lose that motivation to learn the Arabic language for any worldly gains. So and people are not willing to sacrifice that much time and energy to learn Arabic for the sake of their deen. That's the first thing. So motivation is lacking, and there's not much willingness. The second thing is a lack of poor technique and poor knowledge on how languages are learned. And in fact, I'd even say a poor observation on part of the individuals. Because if I could probe you enough, you would be able to give me some principles that you probably used, subconsciously, to acquire your other tongues, other languages that you know, right? So, few things, as I said: lack of motivation and willingness. Second, lack of proper technique, and thirdly, lack of observation. You can learn a lot by just observing your own condition, right? The human condition teaches you about a lot of universal principles, right? We can easily turn this into a philosophical debate, but let's just not go there. So yeah, let's go back to the exercise now. How does a baby acquire their mother tongue? Right. Think of some principles. What is a baby doing when they're learning their first language? Do they imitate their parents? Do they, ask you to, or they point at things and they say to you, what is that? And you tell them what is that, and then they pick it up, and then they probably say wrong, and then they ask you again, and they ask you a million times, and then they're effectively quiet for almost the first 2 years of their life, right? Other than the babas and the mumus and whatever the kids do, right? Let's think about the principles. What comes to mind? They're definitely copying their parents, right? That's something that we can all agree on, right? Correct? Inshallah, all your questions, I'll take them towards the end, inshallah, okay? In fact, let me just answer this one. Yes, once you've learned a few languages, languages operate in family groups. So there's families of languages. So once you have one language of a family, it's very, very easy to learn another language of that family. For example, if you know Italian, it'll be very easy for you to pick up Spanish. Just change a few endings here and there, and you're good to go. And it's very similar to Asian and Arabic or Semitic languages, where there's a lot of shared cognates, shared words, right? Words that appear in Arabic as well as Farsi or Urdu and Pashto and Tajiki and Turkish, for example. So these are, families of languages which are very close to each other, right? So there's a huge sharing of words and phrases and cognates. Okay, so that's it's definitely a thing that once you've learned a language, it's it's always easier to learn another language from that same family of languages. If you're learning a completely different language from a completely different family, like if you're fluent in English, you'll find it very easy to pick up German, let's say, right? And if you're good with French, you'll definitely find it easier to pick up Spanish and Italian, but more easy if you already know Spanish and then you acquire Italian. French shares about 80 to 90%, 85-90% of the words from Spanish and between Spanish and Italian. So it's very, very close to each other in terms of their vocab, right? But the way they're pronounced and the way they are sort of glued together, the syntax of it, that's where things get a bit different. And definitely, it's like a muscle. They're definitely like a muscle. Your brain is like a muscle. The more you use it, the more languages you learn, the more principles you acquire subconsciously, and then the subsequent challenges become easier. Very good. Imitation, observing, listening, right? So a child, he uses a lot of for the first few months of his life, they're just observing, just listening, and they're just looking. And then all of a sudden, you start to see them say mama or baba or things of that nature. And then words, they recognize words and they just say it, right? And over time, they pick up phrases, the phrases that you normally use in your household. But what is very, very interesting about all of this is that the child doesn't just copy the phrases that you say. He also, or she also, copies the tone of it, right? And you will notice how the child is almost imitating, they almost sound like their parents or the person they spend their most of the time with, right? So this is something that that is very, very interesting. So the child has this inbuilt feature where naturally it just is copying to the best of his or her ability. Right? That's where the accent comes from. That's where the tone comes from, right? That's where the body, the gestures, the hand gestures, the body movement. That's where it comes from, right? So language learning is so much more than just acquiring the words of it, right? It's the tone, the accent, the body language, the signs, the hand gestures, everything, right? The baby it absorbs all of that, right? The way to sit, the way to, stand and walk and dress, and subhanAllah, the way to think even, right? The way to feel, the emotional connection. So all of that is coming from imitation, and we'll cover this, in the next slide when we talk about the imitation a bit more. But that's one thing, right? Imitation, and then there's always this idea of active listening. The child, you must have noticed, a child is very, very active when it comes to asking questions. Okay, how do you say this? How do you say that? Right? And when they listen to something, they always try and say, almost automatically, instantly. They try and repeat the same sounds. Right, and it might sound funny, but and a bit cruel at the same time. But ever since my daughter was born, I've used her as a bit of a guinea cow. Let's not use the other word, astaghfirullah. But to sort of just test these theories on her, and I get to learn a lot, and I'm hopeful she gets to learn a lot from that experience as well. I hope. But I've observed her very, very closely on how she learns and how she operates and X, Y, and Z. So, imitation, right? And then, this idea of how the child is always immersed in the language. They always want to communicate, but for the first year and a half-ish, they can't really do that properly. But as soon as they've made enough sense of the language, they start using the same words again and again, right? And from based on this experience, I even started building a daily, phrasage or phrases that a child uses daily, with their parents, or the phrases the parents use with the child on a daily basis, right? And how you can easily turn that into Arabic and then give that for sort of handbook to the parents, and the parents can start speaking Arabic to their children, even if no one speaks Arabic in the house, right? So anyway, the point is that observation. And so when you see this, there's another thing that you learn, is that for the first almost year and a half, the child doesn't have the correct phonetics. They struggle to pronounce the right words, right? They might stutter, right? They might have a bit of a stammer, right? They might not pronounce certain letters properly. Right, so phonetics, having the right phonetics, the right pronunciation of things, right? That is also something that the child, picks up on. Now, if you three things we've talked about: immersion, being actively learning the language, and the third one, right, which is, quickly everyone, what was the third one? Just so I know you guys are listening. Quickly. So immersion, active listening, and active learning, and then thirdly, the phonetics, right? The phonetics. the phonetics, saying the right letters and making the right sounds from the mouth, right? The right mouth movements, the right sounds that come out of the mouth. So 3 things. Now, if you compare this with an adult, you can clearly see where an adult already has an advantage over a child. Can you guess what that is? Yes. So, right, the answer is in the word speak, right? And the ability to make the sounds, the phonetics, right? They already have the phonetics. So they don't need to spend, the child spends in almost a year and a half just to get the phonetics, right? The children, they don't really have a good knowledge of phonetics when they're born, right? It's just something they pick up, they experiment, they put their mouth in weird positions. That's how, over a long period of time, they, and of course, in parallel with, with active copying, immersion, and imitation, right? And this is called, of course, this the short or the closed feedback loop that you must have learned in the book Ultra Learning, right? The child is immersed, is actively listening, and it starts to imitate, actively tries to put everything into action, right? And then it self-corrects itself, so much so that it starts to sound like his parents or her parents, right? And so the self-correction and getting the feedback from the ears and then trusting that feedback and then improving, the child is doing all of that automatically, right? So an adult already has figured out most of the phonetics, right? So where a child will take a year and a half just to get the phonetics right, an adult already has most of the phonetics correct. They already have them sorted. Just a few letters which are non-native to them in a different, for Arabic, most of the non-natives will not be used to the dad or the ayn, the dha, right? These are some of the let's call them unorthodox phonetics, right? To the English language. But most of the other sounds, like the ka, the ba, the ta, these are sounds which are essentially familiar to an English speaker, right? So that's the first clear advantage, right? The second thing is you already have a complete library of meaning, right? Meanings, concepts in your mind. So you can use your current language to propel your language learning. Now, there is an argument between acquiring and learning a language, and we'll cover that in a second, right? But the difference between acquiring and learning a language essentially is that a child, he doesn't memorize and rote learn things through translation, so it's not natural. Acquiring comes from not using any other language, and you start to think and feel and connect and naturally respond to a in a language, right? So you're essentially acquiring, you're not learning. It's not like learning for a test. It's more like you live with the language and you start thinking and feeling and communicating on a very native kind of level, right? Even if you're not too fluent, but you're learning that. That's how a kid learns, right? It takes a lot more time, right? But if you can sort of short circuit that using your current language, you can sort of you can transition towards acquiring a language after you've laid a good foundation, a conceptual foundation in a language, right? And this can be done very, very quickly, and it can be done side to side in parallel. And inshallah, this is the approach that we are taking in this course, and you'll see inshallah how quickly you'll start to interact with the language, inshallah. Okay. So this is in a nutshell how a baby learns, and an adult already you can see how they have an advantage. An adult, of course, they don't have the patience of a child to not speak, and they don't have the luxury of not speaking for 2 years, right? You have families, businesses, perhaps kids, many things in life they need to tend to, and you don't have the luxury of staying quiet for 2 years and experimenting with in this way, unless you move to a desert, like a lot of initial Talab al-Ilm back in the day. They used to go to Mauritania, and knowing nothing of Arabic, they would just spend time with the Bedouins, and just, that's how they picked up Arabic. And even, before the Medina books were introduced into the Arabic curriculum in Medina University, Mashaykh like Sheikh Bilal Phillips, Hafidhullah, he has detailed his experience of how they learned the language, right? So, point being that, an adult has an advantage over a child. Okay, so just quickly, let's just quickly go through the next points, inshallah, before we end this initial session, and then we move on to the next. So immersion, when we talk about immersion, so immersion is either good or bad. Now, you can have people who have lived in foreign countries for 10 years, 12 years, right? And they don't speak a word of that language, right? But then you have people who go for 3 months and they are almost at B1 level after 3 months. And in fact, the author of Ultra Learning, the book that I made you guys, read in the break, they did a language, challenge, and they challenged themselves to learn 4 different languages in a year. So 3 months in a different country, but they decided to go on, go full immersion. So a good immersion would be where you're, using the tools that we describe in the following sections, actively. You're actively listening, you're actively, reading, you're actively, communicating with others. So you're putting out what you've taken in. You start to use whatever you learn from day one. And you pick up language as you go. So you pick up, you do in time or just in time learning. You learn things which are most relevant and important to you. You don't learn things which are perhaps, not even, for example, it will not help you much to learn a list of vegetables in Arabic right now, because you don't need to use that in your daily, subhanAllah, I remember learning, going through these kind of lists back in the day. And there were no benefit. You forget most of those lists, and the things which remain relevant, those are the things which you remember. Okay, so a good immersion would mean that you are doing just-in-time learning the most important things, and you're active about that, and you're imitating the speakers and natives in that. A bad immersion would be you're there, you're living in a country, and you're doing none of that. You're not immersing yourself, you're imitating the native, you're not actively listening or reading or speaking or writing, right? You're not doing any of those good immersion things. As a result of that, you will not be learning any of the language, or you will not learn anything. I mean, this lens from the experience of many thousands of people, who've tried to learn French or German in England, and they are just as terrible at it after 3 years or 4 years studying it as they were when they first started, right? So that is bad immersion. Language is not learned through grammar. Languages are not learned through rote memorization. They come, you learn them when you immerse yourself by actively listening and reading and making sense of the language and using it, okay, and imitating the speakers. So these are the 3 core principles, but inshallah we'll talk about the principles in the next slide in a bit more detail, right? So how to do it? You can easily compare the good and bad immersion, and you can see how for a good immersion to occur, you don't actually need to go to an Arab country, right? You can sort of create exercises for listening, active listening and active reading and speaking and writing right where you are, right? So I want to sort of move on from this to a thought exercise, right? So just as a disclaimer, no one speaks Fusha in the world, right? As a general language, a means of communication. You only find ulama giving lectures in Fusha, and even that is becoming rare. Very few ulama speak good Arabic, right? And then Fusha at that, it's even it's people ulama who speak Fusha, right? After so by Fusha, I mean proper classical Arabic, not just the modern Arabic, right? So you can find many ulama who are good in Arabic, but they're good in the modern Arabic. They're not really polished in the Fusha. So it's a minority within a minority, and so on and so forth. So no one actually speaks the Fusha, right? So just moving to an Arab country will not actually help with learning Fusha. But anyway, let's do a thought exercise on this quickly. Let's say we all, in our individual capacity, we move to different Arab countries. Name an Arab country that you would like to move to, and so name that in the chat, and just continue with the exercise, right? Say you want to move to, let's say Saudi, right? You want to go to Saudi Arabia, and now you're there, right? Imagine your day from sleep. So let's start with the night and then go towards the day and then the rest of it. So you're just trying to recover from a day's work, whatever you've done. We'll come to that in a second. But you're in your room, or you're in your hostel, whatever you are, or you're with your family in the apartment, and of course your family is the same tongue as you, so they don't speak Arabic, unless you're married to an Arab person, and they don't speak Fusha either. So you sleep, and then that's 8 hours of the day gone. Okay, 8 hours of the day gone. Right. طيب. That leaves you with another how many hours? 16 hours, right? So 16 hours. Out of the 16 hours, keeping in mind, the 7-8 or whatever, 7-8-3-3-2-1 rule, right? 8 is gone. 3 hours are going to be spent on praying and salah, so it's going to be a very private time. You're not going to be learning any language whatsoever, right? So 16 minus 3, 13. Good. Right. And then out of 13, you're going to be spending 1 hour of exercise perhaps, and then 2 hours of time with your family. So another 3 hours gone. That's 10 hours left. Okay. Out of the 10 hours, let's say you have to work to support your family and whatever the case may be. And most of our work is done in English, right? So another 3 to 4 to 5 hours gone, right? And of course, worse for others who work for like 7-8 hours. That actually leaves you with just, let's say, maximum 4 to 5 hours, right? And that's a luxury if you could get 4 to 5 hours, right? A lot of people who I know who've gone to Egypt and have gone to Saudi and have gone to other countries, that is what they report. They don't spend they spend maximum 3 to 4 hours in class, and then another 2 to 3 hours maximum on working on the language. Well, let's say another, if someone is not working at all, then they can spend another 5 hours. But the 10 hours is the max that you can do in a given day if you're full time, if you're doing it full time. But for most people, they can't concentrate for that long, so it's mostly between 5 to 8 hours. Okay. In those 5 to 8 hours, what are you doing? How are you actually learning the language, living in an Arab country? And we have to be learning Fusha, right? No one speaks Fusha. So you're not learning Fusha on the road, outside class. So that doesn't help you with your actual goals of learning Arabic. It just makes you fluent in a completely different language almost, right? Normally people, speak in the dialects, national dialects. So maybe you can, some of the Westerners, what they do is on an exchange program, they go and they spend their entire days sitting in a shisha bar, smoking pipe and, just playing games and, doing every kind of stuff, all kind of things that you and I can't do as Muslims, right? So we're not going to pick up the Darija or the Hassaniya or whatever the dialects are, right? So how do you envision yourself learning Arabic in class, and how are you revising? The thing is, your time of 5 to 8 hours a day is going to be spent on learning and then revising, right? So revision is when you're on your own. You can't really do it with other people, necessarily speaking. You could do it in a group, but then of course you're still taking in the same information. So you're just revising. You're not learning anything new, right? So 3 hours is essentially revision time. So the progression and the progress is it only comes in those 5 hours of study, right? In the class, how are you learning the language? I want to hear this from you. How are you envisioning yourself learning the language in class? You don't have any more time. You don't have more than 8 hours a day in any country of actual study, right? Because most people can't really focus for more than that. And they have work, and they have families, and they have exercise to do, and they have prayers to do, and they have to sleep as well, right? To continue the next day. How are you spending time in the class? How do you envision yourself spending time in class? Very good. So you're listening. You're on the listening end, right? You're on the listening end. So you're not actually speaking directly, because you're not at that stage yet. But what you are doing is you're taking in information, right? So most of your initial months, 7 to 8 months, are spent on mostly just listening to the teacher, and of course building your vocabulary, right? And of course, if you get a bad teacher, the progress is slowed even more, right? Most of the people I know who've come back from Egypt and Saudi after 2 years, 3 years, the best they can do is have a very basic, conversation in Arabic, a normal daily dialectic kind of, the dialect Arabic, not the Fusha. Right, so you're listening and you're taking notes, and perhaps on a little bit you're answering questions in Arabic because you slowly, right? Which of those things you can't do or can you not do in a non-Arab country? Listening to a teacher, you can do it in a video. You can do it via Zoom, and you can do it perhaps with an Arab teacher in person. Right? You have some very solid Arab teachers. In England, I studied with some very good teachers, mashallah, who taught me Tajdeed, and I had very good friends, mashallah. They were doing PhD. They were not Arab teachers; they were students. But mashallah, just spending time with them. If you know how to learn from someone, you can learn from anyone, right? Anything that you're actually doing in an Arab country, you can create that environment in your bedroom or your office or wherever you are, wherever you study, in your native environment where you are at the moment in the world, right? So this thought exercise, it's just to show you that it's very possible to learn Arabic on your own, perhaps, or in a group as we are doing at the moment, in your country. You don't have to travel to a country to learn Arabic to a very high level. Right, most of the mashayikh I know who are fluent in Fusha, they actually speak Fusha, not just the dialect, the Saudi or the Egyptian. They actually speak like Fusha. You'd think that they've come from some 1,000 years ago, right? But you have people like that, right? And even the Arab ulama who I am in touch with, and I have studied with them in the past, and then others who I've read books of, right? They all confirm this realization that you don't need to move to an Arab country. What it really comes down to are the few principles of language learning. If you can achieve them where you are, right? Inshallah, you'll become fluent, and even more fluent than the natives, inshallah, right? Keeping this in mind, I just want to tackle this topic of fluency. I hope this is clear, right? This first slide should not leave you with any doubts as to your potential of learning Arabic, right? Your potential of learning Arabic right where you are. And my job is to implement, and our job in the Diet program is to implement all these principles in a workable, actionable content, right? So you don't have to create all of these things from scratch. You see, the most successful entrepreneurs, they say that knowledge should be free, and it's only the implementation of it that you pay for. Right? After this slide, I'm going to give you all the resources, important resources that you need to have to study Arabic on your own for free. You don't have to continue doing any course, not even my course, or not this course, right? But it's the implementation that the students pay for, right? It saves you years of effort, and it saves you time, right? And then have a mentor to guide you through that process. The active, routine, the kind of resources made for you, and everything done for you. All you need to do is have that someone on your neck forcing you to implement that, right? And showing up every week, and you have that, accountability, the weekly reviews and everything. So it's the implementation that we are aiming for in this program. Okay. Other than that, knowledge is free. I mean, I've said this to my students, for many, many months now. And in fact, years for those who've studied with me for that long. that, this knowledge can be learned for free from YouTube, right? But then what it really comes down to is the implementation. How are you going to implement this knowledge? How quickly are you going to learn it, right? And are you going to have a mentor to make sure your concepts and your aqidah and everything is corrected and it stays, online at the same time? So it's a holistic program, right? That students should pay for if they do want to sign up for anything. If not, they have the option to study for free, right? So inshallah, that's having that out of the way. Let's quickly touch upon acquiring and learning a language. We've already mentioned this, but learning a language is like you learn for a test, right? You have a piece of information and you somehow get it uploaded to, in your mind, to your brain, by rote memorization or mnemonics or flashcards or whatever the case may be. Whatever the techniques you use, you learn a language, or just constant reviewing, right? And acquisition is when you try and acquire things without the help of a second language, right? That's really what it comes down to. So there's a lot of active listening and reading in the native tongue, and you stop any foreign language, any external language from tampering with the current language that you're learning. Okay, and this is something that we should. These two approaches, they're not mutually exclusive. They can be combined. So initially learning a language and then, translating all of that knowledge to acquiring it. So there will be a point where you will stop using any English whatsoever, right? But not in the beginning, because if you do it in the beginning, it will become very, very stressful, right? And in language research, stress has been shown to be, inversely proportional to your progress in a language. So we want to avoid stress as much as possible. We want to make this fun. We want to make this enjoyable, and we want to make this fruitful, inshallah. Okay. So to end this slide, what do we mean by fluency? Because this is a term that is, thrown around very casually and vaguely. Oh, are you fluent? I'm fluent in Arabic. Or are you fluent in that X, Y, and Z language? I'm fluent. Yes, I'm. But what do you mean fluent? For example, if I were to ask you, those of you who are fluent in, some of you said, what did you guys say? Let's say Somali, right? Somali, Norwegian, right? If I was to ask you guys, you're mashallah native level fluent in these languages because you've grown up in that environment, right? In your families, for example. Let's just use English. You're all. This is something we can all relate to. You're fluent in. Would you consider yourselves fluent in English at least? Right? Yes or no? Quickly. And I'm sure native level fluent for most of you, right? Or even all of you. Good. But see what I did there? I tricked you guys into saying yes to a very vaguely defined thing. I said, are you fluent in English at least? You said, yes, fluent. But could you, tomorrow, let's say, give a lecture on theoretical physics? Or let's say on, the field theory for linguistics? Could you give a lecture on that tomorrow? You could not. You will not be able to do that because you're not fluent in that subject, in that topic, in your language, right? And believe me, you can have. Okay, I can give you my own example. Growing up, we were quite pampered by our parents, so I did not have to go through, the standard, we wouldn't be required to do certain tasks like supermarket, grocery, our parents used to do it. Okay. So like living in England and growing up in England, I couldn't name certain vegetables in English. Because I hadn't gone to the supermarket to buy those things, right? My mum would just cook those things and we just knew their names in Urdu, right? So even though I'm studying, maths and I'm going to, big universities and all that, I couldn't name basic things. Does that mean I'm not fluent in English? I'm fluent in some aspects of it and completely ignorant in some aspects of it. Okay, that's just the reality of language learning. Fluency is always subject specific. You can be fluent in one science and be completely ignorant in the other. So non-fluent and beginner in the other, right? So there's a general framework of a language. Okay, that's your first 1,000 words, which we're going to come to, inshallah. And a basic language framework, a basic understanding of how a language, fixes itself together, the words glue together. And then, you go subject specific. Subjects, the more you read more you read and listen to lectures in a given subject, the more fluent you become. Okay, just because you spend 4 or 5 years in an Arab country, or even 10 years, right, studying Sharia, for example, does not mean you are now fluent in Arabic rhetoric, balagha, for example, or nahu, right? A sad story. People spend 10 years in Medina or Qura, and they don't have any solid idea of how the books of nahu are written. So most of the people they lack that competence, right? I was trying to explain this concept to one of my friends here, that very, very good brothers, mashallah, they're doing good work, great work, right? And they have good aims, high aims, but they don't have the competency to actually fulfill those aims, right? Because they've not developed that fluency in different. So mastery of a subject is very, very, very similar, or almost same in concept to the idea of fluency in a language. The more fluent you are in a given subject, on a given topic, right, the more mastery of that topic you have, right? So this sort of interlinks with the idea of the Feynman technique, as they call it. It shouldn't be called Feynman technique. It's famous by that name, but people have used it for thousands of years. People have used it in many, many ways in different. Ulama have used it. So it's just about all it is just trying to teach, or pretending to teach, and expressing things in the most simplest of terms. Even before Einstein said, if you can't explain something in the simplest of terms, you don't understand it well enough, right? So conceptual mastery, understanding of things is directly correlated with your fluency in that subject. Okay, inshallah. Okay, so with this, we will end this section. We'll take a quick 5 to 7 minute break, or 10 minutes. You take your time, inshallah, but no more than 10 minutes, inshallah. Okay, so come back, and then we'll carry on with the next sections, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala.